about the meaning of 666, the mark of the beast. You woke up this morning thinking, I hope that's what we talk about today in church. It's an ominous topic, a menacing, even frightening topic to many people. Back in the 80s, I remember that televangelists were still saying that rock and roll was the devil's music. And what happened, the record industry figured this out because bands that had nothing to do with Satanism or evil started putting like pentagrams and 666 marks on their album covers because, of course, parents don't want their teenagers to listen to that. And what happens, what do teenagers do when their parents don't want them to listen to something? They bought it. So they figured out we can put 666 and pentagrams on these albums and sell them like crazy. And so when I see 666, I'm serious about this. Whenever I see 666, I think of 80s hair metal bands with like big teased hair, like Aquanet hairspray. To me, it represents 666. That's what I think of, at least. Now, for some people, yeah, they see this as something that they can pull specific meaning out of. They can name a person, or they have a scenario where they believe that this person is going to be the beast, and this mark stands for that person. Other interpretations are more creative. Some serious, some funny. My favorite, I think about 5 years ago, I was behind a car at a stoplight, and I saw this bumper sticker. 667, the neighbor of the beast. I've been waiting 5 years to use that in a sermon, actually. That's the best, I think, that I've ever seen. And if you look at American pop Christianity and the common views of the end times, 666 and the mark of the beast, whatever that is in Revelation 12 and 13, is synonymous with the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is this person, many of you already know this, is this person who's seen as a charismatic world leader, a man who will emerge and at first seem to bring peace to the world, but then will become increasingly egomaniacal over time and will turn into a dictator. So I ask this question in all seriousness. In what generation of earth is there not someone who emerges as a charismatic, do you follow what I'm saying? As a charismatic leader who appears to be a person of peace and then turns more egomaniacal over time? I mean, it's like take your pick. In every generation, we have several options like that. So Saddam Hussein, in my lifetime, was seen as maybe this is the Antichrist. Gaddafi, the former dictator of Libya, was thought to be the Antichrist by some Christians. And of course, where are those guys now? They're not around here anymore. And so there are evil dictators in every generation that could fit this bill. Now, more than that, it seems that whenever there is a leader who a certain group of people disagree with, the person doesn't have to be evil, but if they disagree with the leader, then they'll label that person the Antichrist. And so, again, in my lifetime, I've seen the following people be accused of being the Antichrist. Well, Mikhail Gorbachev, because he was the leader of the Soviet Union, he had a birthmark on his head, if you remember. And so some people said that was the mark. I've heard Ronald Reagan. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 3 names, and each of his names have 6 letters apiece. So there are people convinced that Reagan was the Antichrist. Of course, Bill Clinton, the Pope, any president really, the current president, President Obama. There was a poll taken by, I think, Public Policy Polling this summer that found that 13% of Americans are sure that Barack Obama is the Antichrist. Another 13% they think so, but they're not sure. So that means 26% of Americans at least suspect that the President of the United States is the Antichrist. 14% believed in Bigfoot in that same polling. 5% believed that Paul McCartney was killed in a car accident in 1966 and he was replaced with a body double so the Beatles could continue to make money. So, I mean, there are all kinds of beliefs in general, but especially about this topic. Now, here's an important point to realize. The word Antichrist is not in the book of Revelation. You think that's interesting? The word Antichrist is not in the book of Revelation. If you'd like to take notes, by the way, as we go through the sermon, there's a place in your worship handout to do that. Revelation 12 and 13 speak of a symbolic dragon, and then there's the first beast, and then there's the second beast. And Revelation 12:9 says the dragon is Satan. The dragon is a symbol for Satan, the devil. And then you have the first beast in Revelation 13, and then the second beast. And so we're going to talk about what that might mean today. And it won't seem connected at first, but we're also going to talk about something else today. One of our values here at One Church is no perfect people allowed. And what we mean by that is that I think millions of Christians around America and, of course, around the world often feel like they have to pretend in church. They have to pretend that they're somehow super Christians and that they don't have problems. And you know how it goes. You walk in, you give the plastic smile and the handshake. How you doing? Oh, I'm great. You just had like a knockdown, drag-out argument in the parking lot. But there's something about leaving the car and walking through that parking lot that just makes people saints before they walk in to the church building. We've all felt that pressure. I've had conversations this week with 5 people this week who told me that's their church experience. Literally every week I have people telling me they feel like I can't be myself in the church experiences that I've had in the past. I had questions that I felt like I couldn't say out loud because I would be judged as not having enough faith or whatever. And then certainly I couldn't talk about problems I was dealing with. Nobody had any problems. And if they did, it was like 10 years ago. It was something that was always way in the past. And so there was this feeling that I can't be honest about who I am. And Revelation 12 and 13 do say, and we're gonna unpack this, that the primary characteristic of these beasts are that they deceive. They lie, they pretend. And they put pressure on other people to pretend. Isn't that interesting? That's primarily what these beasts do in Revelation 12 and 13. Also today, like I said earlier in the welcome, we're going to launch our international missions program today. This is going to be a big day in the history of our church. 15 years from now, we're going to look back on today as a big day in the history of our church. We're going to be talking about child sponsorship. We're going to be interviewing a couple here, and we're going to be talking about a potential mission opportunity in Nicaragua today. All connected, in my view, to what we're going to learn in Revelation 12 and 13. So I want to begin by reading a scripture. This comes from Revelation chapter 13, verses 11 through 18. So we have the dragon in Revelation 12. We have the first beast at the beginning of chapter 13, and now we have the second beast. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It looked innocent, but it was actually evil. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Just interesting little details. Verse 15, the second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast. So the second beast really is propping up the first beast. The second beast is like the PR agent for the first beast. So that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, go ahead and go to the next, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads. There's the mark. So that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark. So this is an economic punishment, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, or in Greek, the number of man. It can be either one, a man or just man in general. That number is 666. So it's a famous passage, isn't it? How many of you have like horrible memories of your childhood and watching, end of the world movies based on a passage like this? I've talked to people even this week who said, I remember watching movies, they tried to scare us to death. And this passage always played into that. Now, like I said, in Revelation 12, the dragon is Satan, and you have the first beast, and then the second beast props up the first beast. Imagine 2,000 years from now. In the year 4013, someone discovers my iPhone. Now, I'm having trouble getting the battery to make it through a day, but somehow they get it to come on. This is 4013, so they can do things like that. Somebody discovers my iPhone in the year 4013. And when my iPhone comes on, they see the record of texts that I have sent from my phone. And let's say that the person who discovered my iPhone makes a presentation, maybe to a group of reporters or historians, and using the text from my iPhone, this person makes a presentation. And maybe he says to them something, there are cameras everywhere, or whatever that looks like in 4013, and he says, we have a giant announcement to make today. This is groundbreaking news. It's going to change history. We've discovered a primitive communication device called an iPhone. And it's apparently it was owned by this primitive caveman named Ryan way back in the year 2013. This is way back, 3 years before Nickelband became the most popular band on planet Earth. Or Nickelback, I meant to say. Oh my God, I screwed that up. Nice. Oh my word. 30 years before Justin Bieber became president of the United States. That's my attempt at recovering from the bomb joke right there. Aren't there sometimes you just don't want to know the future because of things like that? Who knows? So in the year 2013, they discovered 4013, they discovered my iPhone. And he says, we found a text on this iPhone that points to something that we did not know existed formerly. And this is a very important discovery, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Here is the text that they found. I sent a text to my wife in the year 2013, my wife Hannah, and it says, honey, let's get some Buffalo Wild Wings tonight and watch preseason football. I'm starving. Love you. That's the text that I sent way back in the dark ages of August of 2013. And then they say, this text on the iPhone reveals that there is a lost winged desert buffalo of Arizona that we did not know existed, but this text proves the existence of this animal, and we're going to go searching for this animal. And so they set up a task force to go search only the best graphics for one church. Apparently, the winged buffalo was also a cartoon flying over the real Camelback Mountain. And we're going to form a team, and we're going to go search for the fossil record of this lost winged desert buffalo of Arizona, because we saw it in the text. The search doesn't go very well. They've also deduced a few other things. There must have been a famine in 2013, because this poor caveman Ryan says he was starving. And maybe football is a game that is maybe played in the same field where they go hunting for the lost winged buffalo. And maybe they ate the last one, who knows? And they postulate all kinds of things from this text. But the search doesn't turn up any lost winged buffalo. 20 years later, another team gets a hold of my text, and they make another presentation. After using the best tools of archaeology and history and languages, they make another presentation to this same group, and they say something like this. It turns out that there's been some misinformation coming from the iPhone text. We actually haven't been able to find the fossil record of the lost winged buffalo of Arizona. And it turns out, and stick with us here, actually there was a restaurant chain in 2013 in America called Buffalo Wild Wings. We found it in business records. And apparently there was this way of preparing chicken with spicy sauce that was supposedly invented in the city of Buffalo in the state of New York in the United States. And this restaurant chain actually served this particular kind of chicken. We found all this information on Al Gore's superhighway. And looking at the records, we figured out that there's actually no record of a famine in 2013. It appears that Ryan was actually using hyperbole or exaggeration, which is a common feature of American English in 2013. He was just saying he was hungry. Maybe he didn't eat lunch that day. And he wanted to go to this restaurant and have chicken wings that were called buffalo wings. Oh, and one more thing. Football was a game that was played, and one of the features of this restaurant is they had these devices called televisions that were primitive moving image boxes, and you could go to the restaurant, eat the wings, and watch a game from anywhere in the country. And it turns out that there was no famine, but this was a restaurant that Ryan was going to. What's the difference between these two teams of people who studied my text from the iPhone? Well, one just looked at the text, and one also considered context. Context. And I have something, if you're taking notes, I want to share something with you. Text minus context equals misinterpretation. And any message, whether it's a phone text, whether it's an email you send to a friend, a Facebook message, the Bible, whatever it is, text without context equals misinformation. When we talk about the dragon and the beast, and if this means the Antichrist, how important do you think context is to understanding what the text means? What do you think? Do you think it's important? And it seems that there's so much in our culture about this passage that is taken out of context. I have two words I want to share with you. And they're big theological words, but they mean something very simple. They're exegesis and eisegesis. If you're keeping notes, you could write those down. They sound complicated, but they're not. Exegesis means to get meaning out. Just think of exegesis like an exit sign. Exit means out. So exegesis means I pull meaning out of the text. Exegesis is good. That's what we want. We want to understand what the text actually means, and that requires context. And so exegesis means I pull meaning out of the text. Eisegesis is the opposite of that. Eisegesis means that I read meaning into the text that is not there. It means I fail to realize that we all wear a pair of glasses, that we all see the world and the Bible and faith and everything we experience every single day through a specific set of lenses. It's my framework, it's my filter, it's the way I interpret the world around me. There is no way of getting rid of our glasses. We can try, but it's just us trying to get rid of our glasses. The key is to figure out, we all have a set of glasses. And when we read the text, we all have a tendency to commit eisegesis. We all tend to read into the text things that aren't there, like winged buffaloes of Arizona. But context can actually help us to do good exegesis and pull meaning out of the text. This is kind of heady. Are you still with me? Okay. Exegesis versus eisegesis. I don't think there's any area of Bible study where eisegesis is committed more than in Bible prophecy. And it could be that there's actually no area where eisegesis is committed more than specifically this passage, where people read this and they read countries, like modern countries, into the text that simply are not there. Russia, China, nations that did not exist when this text was written. The names of people who did not exist when this text was written. Ronald Reagan. I don't see Ronald Reagan in chapter 13. But there are people who would, they don't know they're committing eisegesis, and so to their dying day, they will believe that whatever they think about this is correct, never realizing that they're reading it through their glasses and committing eisegesis. Do you know what I'm talking about? And no amount of evidence or logic would ever convince them otherwise, because they will not acknowledge their glasses and their eisegesis. So, like I said, Antichrist is not in the book of Revelation. That word is not there. It's actually only in the Bible 5 times. Both of them all 5 of those are in 2 books, the letter of 1 John and the letter of 2 John. I have some scriptures here. You can just write these down. We don't have time to go into them, but you could look at them later. Antichrist is only mentioned in 1 or 2 John. 2 Thessalonians talks about the man of lawlessness that Paul speaks of. Matthew 24, Jesus mentions what's called the abomination of desolation. And that comes from Daniel. And you see those 4 references there in Daniel. All of these images together, even though 1 and 2 John are the only ones that say Antichrist, most Bible prophecy buffs combine all of these together into one person. Maybe they're right. Or maybe it's eisegesis. I really don't know the answer to that question. I'm humble enough to realize we don't know clearly exactly what this means. But these are where the images come from that feed into the image of who the Antichrist is. So I wanted to start there in kind of theological and my comfortable theological egghead territory to set the stage for those who feel like, I already know what this is. They read this incredibly cryptic passage and they, well, that's easy, I know who it is. Or I have my scenario figured out. Well, context is extremely important. So I just want to talk about context for a few minutes. And then we're going to be able to see how this passage actually applies to things that affect our everyday lives. Whether people pretend in church or not, or a pastor causes them or puts pressure on them to pretend. And what about the kids in Nicaragua and the kids around here? We're going to see how this passage might apply in its context to things that affect our everyday lives. So what does 666 mean? What could it mean in its historical context? Again, John is writing a letter. This is the context of Revelation. John is writing a letter to 7 actual historical churches that existed in what is modern-day Turkey. Back then it was called Asia. Now the whole continent's called Asia, but it's Western Turkey now. He's writing to 7 churches, and they were facing persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. You have Caesar, who's leading the Roman Empire, and the local authorities, if they find out they're Christians and they won't worship Caesar, because that was something that every citizen of the Roman Empire was expected to do, worship the image of Caesar. If they won't worship Caesar, then there are consequences. They could be killed. We find out in Revelation somebody already has been. A Christian has been killed because they wouldn't worship Caesar. And there were certainly economic consequences. That's the context of Revelation. Now, no one really knows for sure what 666 means. We need to say that. Nobody really knows for sure. It's an interesting number. One interesting thing about it is it's a triangular number, meaning if you add up the numbers 1 through 36, so 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, all the way to 36, it adds up to 666. It's one of the few, it's just interesting mathematically. Maybe that informs it, I don't know. It adds up to 666. Another feature is it's almost 2/3 of 1,000. Just interesting. Later on in Revelation, there's a millennium mentioned. We're going to talk about that next week, actually. Just interesting tidbit. In Hebrew, this is written in Greek, but in Hebrew, letters actually stand for numbers. And it could be that the writer of this is extremely familiar with the Old Testament. Most of the images here come out of the Old Testament. It's written in Greek, but there's extreme familiarity with the Old Testament, which is written in Hebrew. It could be that what is happening here is what's called gematria, Gematria, gematria. If that's the case, then gematria was the practice of using numbers as a sort of code language. And because each number corresponds to a letter in Hebrew, you see where this is going? You could read the number and switch it to the letters. Switch each number to its corresponding letters and decode the message. So it could be that this is gematria. Now there's some doubt about that, again, because it's written in Greek, but there is the name of a famous Caesar, and if it's transliterated from Greek to Hebrew, then the numbers do add up to 666. So the majority of Bible scholars looking at Revelation in its historical context, the majority would say 666 probably stands for Nero. Are you familiar with Nero? He was Caesar in the Roman Empire from about 54 AD to 68 AD. Tradition holds that he was Caesar when Peter and Paul were executed. So presiding over the executions of Peter and Paul, you could see how somebody could be thought of as a very evil individual. There's another interesting fact about Nero. Nero committed suicide in 68 AD, but he didn't do it himself, and his only means was a sword. He had his assistant do it. And so he had his assistant kind of perform an assisted suicide by stabbing him. And a myth grew in the Roman Empire that Nero wasn't actually dead and that he would someday come back. It was kind of the prototype of Elvis in that sense, like Elvis sightings, Nero sightings. There were people who believed that Nero wasn't really dead and that someday he would reappear. That we find this outside of the Bible in Roman documents. Isn't it interesting? You remember the passage we just read when he had a fatal wound, but he came back. And he was killed by the sword, but he came back. Do you remember that in the passage? Interesting. It's because of those tidbits and the fact that his name adds up to 666 using gematria that causes the majority of Bible scholars to think it's probably Nero. Now, last week I had you raise your hands a few times just because I wanted to gauge interest. And there's no right or wrong answer. But can I just ask, how many of you have ever heard that before, that it could be Nero? A few. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the clear answer, because we don't know. Another possibility is that 666 stood for the Roman Empire. Not just Nero, but the Roman Empire. The mark of the beast refers to the first beast. And in the description that we didn't read at the beginning of Revelation 13, if you have a Bible, just look at Revelation 13:1. The dragon stands on the shore, and this beast rises up out of the sea. The imagery comes from Daniel chapter 7. And in this area, the Romans would have literally come by way of the sea. They would have attacked through ships and overtaken the land and conquered. It was seen as an unjust empire who was evil by John. The author of Revelation sees Rome as a monster, which is another way of saying beast. And this monster has conquered us and is persecuting us. And so there are some scholars who just think it referred to the Roman Empire. Now, we don't know exactly what it means. Is it just something for the past? Is it something for the future? Will some other leader emerge? It seems like in every generation, people like this emerge. There is one thing we do know about 666. Regardless of whether it was Nero or not, or if it's some other leader or some leader now, and of course we have book series that make that leader the leader of the UN, which I think is more anti-UN than it is anti-Christ. That's a political statement with some Bible verses to support it. We don't know exactly who or what that is, but we do know this. If you're keeping notes, 666 stands for deception and injustice. You remember in the passage that we read that the job of the second beast is to deceive the world. Do you remember that? To deceive the inhabitants of the earth and cause them to worship the first beast. And if people didn't do that, which fits really well with what was going on with the worship of Caesar, if people didn't do that, Revelation 13 says they could be killed. The Roman Empire was killing people who didn't worship Caesar. Or they could just be punished economically. And the way this worked was, if you were part of a trade guild, a collection of people who did the same thing for a living, part of your annual meeting might be offering incense to Caesar and just saying the phrase, Kurios Kaiseros, Caesar is Lord. It just meant you were a good citizen of the Roman Empire. You were trustworthy in business. But that was a problem for Christians. It could be that every month, as a part of your trade guild, you would have a meal, and the meal would be dedicated to a god, a Greek or Roman god, and be dedicated to Caesar. And the grace over the meal might be something like Kurios Kaiseros, Caesar is Lord. And that was a problem for Christians. What would you do in that situation? If you were challenged to somehow compromise your worship of God with, by worshiping something else, putting something else equal with Jesus in your life, what would you do? And so it was the dilemma for these early Christians. Regardless of it, whether it's Nero or somebody else, 666 was all about getting people, deceiving people, to worship this first beast, whatever it is. And there were consequences if they didn't do that. Physical consequences and economic consequences. So the third point, if you're keeping notes, what does this mean for me? If I don't want to receive the mark of the beast, what does it mean for me? Is it a literal mark on my hands and my forehead? I don't think so. The idea there is that if you've seen ultra-Orthodox Jews who wear phylacteries, have you seen this? They wear a black box on their left hand and on their forehead. It comes from Deuteronomy. There's a commandment to write down these words and bind them on your foreheads into your hands. And so there's a little black box with Bible verses written in them. And they'll wear them on their forehead and their left hand. And this could be a parody, a mocking way of saying that the mark of the beast is worn on your forehead or your right hand. It's a symbol. It's not meant to be literal, but it could be a way of mocking God. If we don't want to wear the mark of the beast, how do we avoid it? And how do we wear God's mark? Well, I think the way to do that, based on what we're reading in context, is to seek to live honestly and justly. If the beast is deceiving and committing injustice, we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to seek to live honestly and justly, relieving physical and economic suffering as an act of worship to God. The mark of the beast means deception It means injustice, and it means harming people physically and economically if they don't worship this beast. So what do we do if we want to worship Christ? Whether it's the Antichrist literally or not, well, it's just the opposite of those things. We want to live honestly, and we want to be concerned about justice. And we have the privilege of being concerned about justice. And we want to look for people who are suffering and relieve that suffering wherever we find it, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional or whether it's economic. Now, like I said, this past week I've talked with 5 people who said that they had to pretend in church because something was going on, some pressurized atmosphere was in their church where they felt like they couldn't be themselves, where they felt like, I have these questions that I've been struggling with forever, some of them about Revelation. I watched the movies when I was a kid, and now I have all these questions, but I can't say those things out loud because I felt like the pastor would look down on me. I felt this pressure to not share what was really on my heart because that's just not the thing you say around here. Or, I was going through this tough time and I felt like I had to go through it secretly. There are people who maybe they would go see a counselor to talk about something, but if they said that they went to a counselor, then other people in their church would judge them. Why don't you just pray more? Why can't you just take care of this? Why don't you have enough faith to address this situation? There was this pressure in my church to pretend. Are you seeing the connection here? Jesus wants to do something through the church. Salvation means wholeness. Jesus wants to heal and make us better and help us grow and make us more like Him and bring a little heaven to earth more and more every day. But there was this pressure to pretend. In the church, another word for pretending is deceiving. There was this pressure to deceive. 1st and 2nd John, when they use the word Antichrist, he doesn't say that it's some world leader someday. He said it's just anything that's against Jesus. That's what Antichrist means. And so, let's point at me now, as a pastor. If I create an atmosphere in the church I serve, where people feel like they have to pretend and they can't be themselves, is that for Christ or Antichrist? What is it? If I create an atmosphere where people have questions and doubts and they're struggling, and if they had an answer, it would really help them in their relationship with Christ and help them to grow, and I create an atmosphere where it's not safe to say those things out loud or you're going to be treated like you're a weirdo, is that for Christ or is that Antichrist? I think a lot of people who are Christians, who have been church people, I hear this every week, have actually experienced Antichrist. No, their pastor was not a world dictator who beheaded people for not receiving a mark on their foreheads or hands. That's an easy version to set up and say, oh, that's something out there. That's kind of a sci-fi scenario where it's one dude who leads the UN. And it makes it easy to put it out there, and then we don't apply what this passage might actually mean every day in our lives. You with me? So for me as a pastor, I don't want to be the second beast. I don't want to be the mouthpiece for some idea that following Jesus is all about making people pretend to be perfect. I don't want to be the mouthpiece for this idea that if you have questions, well, that's a lack of faith. I don't want to be the mouthpiece of that. Am I just way out there? That's what I read when I see Revelation 12 and 13 in context. So there are lots of people who feel like they can't be themselves in church. Just real quick, and I'm going to move on to another subpoint, and then we're going to have an interview and get to the real good stuff here in a minute. One more quick point. I'm not the only person involved in that. We're a brand new church. We've been meeting for 5 months. And a church is really the sum of its parts. And so here's something for all of us to do. And if you're taking notes, this would be great to write down. Something that all of us could do about making sure that our church doesn't become like the second beast, deceiving people and causing people to pretend. Maybe a couple of things to write down here. We'll go back to the verse. If we skip the next slide, we'll go back to the verse. There we go. Be honest about your own questions and shortcomings. If you're writing, this would be a great thing to write down. It seems so simple, but it's so hard to do. And if at any time you feel like, what would Ryan say? Or what would my church say if I say this out loud, or if we have this kind of a one group, or if we do this, if I say, what will my church think? You can just tell yourself this: I don't want to wear the mark of the beast. I want to be honest. I don't want to stand for deception. I want to stand for truth and honesty and justice. And that means I need to say this. Can we don't need to be blood brothers and sisters about it, but can we make a little pact, pinky swear or something? Can we make a little pact that you'll do that? That you'll be honest about the questions and doubts you have and about the struggles that you face in life. And then I will too. And you can hold me to that. Second thing, when someone disagrees with you, when maybe they have a question that you don't have, or they have a view that you don't have, choose to accept them as human beings and love them. Now, does that say you have to agree with them? No. But choose to accept them as people and love them. And then I want to show you this verse if we go back one slide. It's a lot easier to accept and love other people if we realize God's love and acceptance for us. This is what Paul writes about Jesus giving himself on the cross for you, where you sit. Here's how God views you. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, separated from God, Christ died for us. The God that we are worshiping, that we're singing songs to and talking about today, his attitude toward you, regardless of what you've heard in the past, Scripture says God's attitude toward you is that God is so enamored with you that he has given his life that yours might be saved. That he took your bullet, in a sense. Now, if that's not love, I don't know what is. And for those of us who maybe even because of our church experiences feel like, oh man, God's always judging me. It's like we're wilting under the judgment of God. And the idea that God would accept me and love me is just some crazy New Age talk. Well, it actually comes from Romans. But a lot of times the churches we've been raised in give us that kind of a message. And if you realize that God has this level of acceptance for you, it's a lot easier to show that acceptance to somebody else. A pastor friend of mine says this: there's nothing you can do to make God love you any less. And there's nothing you can do to make God love you anymore. Isn't that a freeing feeling? In other words, you cannot earn God's love. You have never done anything to earn God's acceptance or God's love for you. God loves you because that's who God is. It's about God's character. And if you feel that, not just hear it, but feel it, you might have to go to counseling to feel that. I appreciate that. This sermon may not cut it. The messages may be buried so deep, you might have to go talk to somebody for a long time to feel that. But if you feel that, it will be much easier for you to show that same acceptance and love to other people, whether they disagree with you or not. Are you with me? And that is necessary to not wearing the mark of the beast. Because that's Christ's love, that's God's love, that's what God is all about, that's what God wants to do in this world. And anything contrary to that is wearing the mark, the wrong mark. Now, there's another way, and we're going to wrap it up with this, get to the good stuff. The punishment that the beast inflicted on those who didn't worship the first beast was economic and it was physical. And so one of the messages that we can gain from this is, what is going on in my world that is unjust economically? What is going on where people are hurting physically or economically? And the beast caused things like this economic justice and this violence and this pain. And Jesus wants to fix that. If the beast is for injustice, Jesus is for justice. If the beast hurts people economically, Jesus helps people economically. Jesus wants to do the opposite of what the beast does. And so what would that look like in my world? And I've been thinking just in little ways about, where do I shop for clothes? Remember when the factory in Bangladesh collapsed a few months ago? Over 3,000 women were buried alive in that factory. Over 1,000 died. Mothers, daughters, sisters. There are a lot of orphan children because of that clothing factory. I'm talking to me now. What if I bought my clothes from that factory? And even though it's on the other side of the planet, it doesn't matter, it's shipped over here. What if the first person who touched my shirt was buried alive in a factory? Do you think as a Christian that's something I should care about? And so I've been thinking more about, where do I buy my clothes? Where are my clothes made? Are my clothes made in a place that fosters injustice and has women and sometimes children working in an unsafe factory? Is that who I'm buying my clothes? So I've just started to research. Where do I buy my clothes? Can I buy them from places that promote justice instead of injustice? It's just a simple, small way. Just something, and that's just a Christian idea, I think. Now, another way has to do with who we are as a church and the next several years and what we want to do as a church. What is God calling us to do? The second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere is Nicaragua. Behind Haiti. And in Haiti, there was an earthquake, and that drew all kinds of attention to Haiti. But Nicaragua is just kind of out there. And I have all kinds of concerns in life, and so do you. But I don't have the concerns of many Nicaraguans who live on $1 or $2 a day and don't have health care and don't have access to all the things that I enjoy in life and are convenient for me and comfortable for me. And so there's a couple in our church named Walt and Kim Shuck, and they have lots of experience in international missions. And I'm going to talk to them for the next few minutes before we wrap up the sermon today and talk to them about their passion for missions. And then they're going to talk about an opportunity that we have to connect with an organization and sponsor children and actually go on our first mission trip next summer. How cool is that? That as a new church, we could already get into our DNA. This is the kind of thing we want to do as followers of Jesus, to stand for justice and honesty and not wear the mark. These are the kinds of things we want to be involved in. So I want to welcome Walt and Kim. Come on up. I'm going to interview Walt and Kim for a moment. Let's welcome Walt and Kim Shuck. You guys can grab one of that mic right there, and I'm going to get this one for you. Thank you. I asked them, twisted their arm to come up and share, and they're very humble, modest people. And I said, no, tell us why you believe in this and about all of your experience in it, because I want everybody to hear their heart. I want you to hear what God's been doing in their lives and what that looks like practically and what that could look like for our future. So just cut to it here. Walt and Kim, how many international mission trips have you been on at this point?
I've been on probably 6 or 8.
Okay.
If I include Mexico.
Okay.
It's international.
Mexico's international. Well, we'll let you include that. 6 or 8, that's quite a bit. And how many have you led?
We've led 4.
Okay, you led 4.
To Peru.
Okay, to Peru. So pretty extensive experience in international missions and in leading them. So why are you passionate about missions? Why is this important to you?
There's a little bit of a story. I've been on fewer trips. I was a little late to the scene. This was kind of a passion of Kim's. I was one of those who was very comfortable to sit in my chair and talk about, there's so much need here. Why do we have to go halfway around the world? And of course, Kim was going halfway around the world, and I was sitting at home wondering why. And actually had a chance while she was gone I went to a comedian, and he did his whole monologue, and right in the midst of it, he stopped, and he got real serious, and he talked about the insidiousness of homelessness and of course this is right what I was thinking. Why do we've got it all here? And he said, but even our most derelict of homeless have access to clean drinking water. And my little light bulb went on, and that's why we go halfway around the world. Yeah. And so I think about 3 months later, maybe not quite, I went on my first mission trip with Kim, and just life-changing experience.
Yeah. And we are involved in things locally, and that's why. But it doesn't mean that we ignore international missions.
Well, I think if I have to confess, guys, that what I found out is that's a real good argument for somebody who wasn't doing anything anyway. And so that's where the real change for me was.
Yeah. Nice. How about you, Kim? Why are you so passionate about missions?
I don't know. It's something God laid on my heart years ago. I just, like you said, I used to say, I'm going to be a missionary when he dies because he didn't want to go with me. But
That's good.
now he goes and we go together. It's an awesome experience. But
Walt didn't have to die.
He didn't have to die. That was really good.
Even better. It's a bonus.
But just to see the changes in my life, the changes in the people who go on the teams with us, I've just seen. It's amazing what God can do when you're outside of your comfort zone and when you're away from your cell phone and your iPad.
Yeah.
Just how He really wants to use us to show love to the world. Yeah. You know, it's funny because you said something last week about the Peace Corps. I mean, there's a lot of people out there serving in the Peace Corps, but the one thing that they don't have that we have is the hope and love of Jesus Christ. Yeah. To me, that's the difference. That's what we bring to these other people.
We've had lots of great conversations. I mean, you have seen people's lives change, and I don't want to take it away from you, but I mean, would you care to share maybe an example of how has somebody's life been changed through, not using names, but how somebody's life been changed through going on one of these trips?
Let me just to kind of back to a little bit of the first question into the second.
Okay.
It's really easy then to get into a thought of why don't we just send money? What is the whole thing of going on these trips and why is that important? Because really it's not inexpensive and it generally takes the support and help of a lot of people to make that possible. Mm-hmm. So, you know, as Americans, or at least in my thinking, it's let's be efficient with it, let's just send money. And I think where we miss the opportunity is our God is a God of relationships, and why what we're about to do here could be so critical. And what we have been able to witness firsthand is the developing of relationships with people in a community that we become part of. And to have a pastor come to you after 2 or 3 years and just with tears in his eyes, thanking you, me, the group, the team, the involvement that we'd had with this community. Because before we were there, he had 2 or 3 people in his little church. And now he met in a community center that we had helped build. And there was, you know, an entire community coming to church on Sunday. And they were doing life together. That's what you get to see.
Yeah. Transformation.
Yeah. And for people who go from a place like the Southeast Valley, who go on a mission trip, would you agree that they could experience more life change than they create in the people there?
I think really, you know, on a short-term team, that's really who changes. It's our heart that changes. Because you think about it, we're going down and we're supporting a missionary who's in the field doing their work, and we're validating what they're doing within the eyes of the community. But we're only there for a week, 10 days maybe, you know. Mm-hmm. There's not going to be a whole lot of impact that I personally am going to be able to impart on those people. But the change in my life and the change in the people on the team is just, it's tremendous, because your eyes are open to the world, the people that God loves. And it's just incredible.
Yeah. Indescribable, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, just out of conversations, you can't put words to it. Mm-hmm. It's just a change, the power of a changed life. Mm-hmm. So why Nicaragua and why Food for the Hungry?
Okay, so Food for the Hungry is a Christian relief and development organization. They go in quite often after earthquakes or hurricanes or tsunamis or whatever, right? So that's usually how they establish the relationships. And then they switch to the development phase, which allows them to come alongside the community leaders, the churches, and the families to basically, I mean, it's called Food for the Hungry, but there's a lot of different kinds of food, spiritual food, social, economic, development.
It's holistic.
So it's holistic. Yeah. And so why FH? Because they do have a holistic approach. They go into a community right up front, based, with the community leaders, and they already have an agreed plan. The community's plan for change and development, not FH's plan. We're not going to go down there and tell them how they should live. Mm-hmm. Hey, you need to live like us up here in the U.S., right? Yeah. We're going to go down there and come alongside their own plans and help them implement their plan for growth and change, and thus the transformation. Mm-hmm. And FH goes in with again, the plan. It's 7 to 12 years, and they have an exit strategy in place before we ever even get involved, because we don't want to be down there just giving a handout.
Yeah.
We want to help them and teach them how to do it themselves.
Yeah. We would be essentially adopting this area as our church, partnering with this area and doing life and meeting people that we're affecting.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So why Nicaragua?
A couple reasons. Nicaragua, like you said, is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. It's not that far from here. They're Spanish speaking. The culture is going to be kind of similar to where we live now, you know. And I think it would be really cool. I know there's probably a lot of people who can speak Spanish. I don't. I'm trying to learn.
right, sure.
But I think it would be really cool to be able to take some people who can speak Spanish down to Nicaragua, where you can actually face-to-face talk to these people.
Yeah.
FH does supply translators, so don't let that turn you off to a trip. You can still communicate. So.
Okay.
But I think we should also add this particular community has reached out to FH and has requested their involvement. So if we ask why.
Yeah. This particular community, San Bartolo is the name of it. It's basically Nicaragua did some economic research, and they found that this is the second poorest, most vulnerable community in Nicaragua.
Wow.
And there's just some statistics. There's over 1,500 school-age kids, but only 900 of them are in school. Mm-hmm. And there's just they're mostly farmers. Most of their employment is during the coffee harvest, like in January.
Yeah.
And like Ryan said, they live on less than $2 a day. I think it's like $45 a month is the average income. You know, and so the community recognizes that they need growth and they need development and they need education, and they just don't know how to implement it. And so FH comes alongside and will show them and implement programs. And one of the things that we experienced in Peru before that community was closed out was what they called the banquito. It was like the old savings and loans back in the old days, right? Where the community got together and everybody pitched in a couple bucks or whatever, and they saw this savings grow, and they could use the savings to fund things like buying seeds to plant a crop that they could actually harvest and earn an income off of. So in Peru, they did a lot of, they made like pajamas, and they sold them, you know, different clothing things, because Peru's a big textile area.
So you're not just giving fish, but you're teaching people to fish, so to speak.
Right.
Okay. So how do we get involved? What are the nuts and bolts? As we think about it today, what do we do to start this?
Well, we have an awesome opportunity. We got child sponsorship over there. Everything comes back to funding, right? You have to be able to fund it. And so that's how FH funds the programs, is through child sponsorships. It's $35 a month. You can look at them online. I have brochures over there, but FH is a really financially accountable organization. Like over 85, close to 90% goes right out into the field to fund the program.
They're rated high among organizations.
They're really high. So anyway, but come over there. I have a sign-up sheet for information meeting for a short-term trip next summer. If we get 50, we need to get 50 children sponsored so that we can go on this trip next year.
Yeah, and there will be informational meetings later about the actual mission trip next summer.
Correct.
But it just starts with sponsoring a child, going over there and looking and considering that. So, and $35. So we're talking about less than a night out probably for a couple in Chandler. I mean, and that's per month.
Correct.
So it's a very low amount, really.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your passion.
Just
go ahead. Yes. Yes.
You know, it isn't just the monetary, although that's a huge component, but this is a chance to develop a direct relationship with this child. And this goes on as long as we're involved. But also, too, it's a commitment to pray for not only the community, but for this child and his or her family.
Yeah.
So we're not just writing a check every month. This is a call to our hearts, and to allow God to work through us, to change us, but also to change a community.
Nice. Well said. Thank you so much. Let's thank Walt and Kim. I'll take that. Thank you so much. I've loved our conversations, and I can't wait to see what God does through this. And so as we look at a very cryptic passage, and there are all kinds of ideas about how that applies, what if it means stuff like sponsoring a kid? What if following Jesus and not wearing the mark means something like looking for people who are suffering and doing justice and relieving that? What if it looks like something that cool? Instead of this dark, mysterious thing or like an 80s hair metal band, like I think of, what if this topic means that I get to experience the joy of adopting a village and sponsoring kids and seeing the amazing thing that God does through people's lives in a program like that? Will you bow your heads with me? Let's pray. Oh God.